Welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. We're going to talk about Kathy Griffin's press conference. Right out of the gate, the story of Kathy Griffin coming out today. I don't know. There's a couple things that come to my mind. It's the opening statement by the attorney. I don't even want to go there yet. I'm not sure where to start here. See, Kathy Griffin laid out a case that she was attacked even after she apologized. The problem is when you go out publicly displaying a mask for whatever reasons, whether it's to make a joke or to go in front and then try to apologize after the fact, the consequences is that there are children involved. And then there's families involved. And then it goes public. And then the backlash. The supporters that get behind Kathy and the people that don't support her. So what she did on all levels, I guess I'm trying to find the words. I'm not quite sure where to start with this because I think Kathy, first of all, her attorneys letting her go on and on. They should just cut her mic. No matter how much you dislike somebody, whether it be the attorneys involved in this or not, what I kept hearing over and over again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because of Trump that she did this. But if you listen to the recording with her and the photographer, she knew what she was doing was wrong, and she still did it. That's the problem I'm looking at. She was well aware that this was going to cause a problem. No one has ever seen anyone make a joke like this, at least as far as I can remember, publicly. Then I've never seen a mask in the public eye like that. The reaction from the public was outrageous because of what she did. I would have expected that. I'm surprised that she kept apologizing over and over again. I get that she was nervous. I think if you put yourself in the spotlight like Kathy does, it's like you kind of walk right into it. A lot of times what happens is when people make a bad choice of words, you apologize and move on. And it's very hard to accept that, that human side where we slip up and we say things. And that will forever bother some of us if we've ever said anything and we wish you could take back those words. And I think when somebody's angry and they say things, there's consequences. And sometimes, unfortunately, those consequences can have long-term effects. And that's kind of why I look at this. It's like, why would you do a beheading mask knowing that this was going to cause a problem? And then only to blame somebody. So that's kind of gets into that area where she's back to where she was before, blaming Trump. And I think that what the lawyers did here is they let her go on and on to plead her case to the public. And I think that's done in a way to kind of muddy the waters so that then down the road, the judge or the other lawyers will be more lenient on her. The problem with that, too, again, that doesn't solve the bigger problem, the problems that this can cause down the road. And we don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know what this is laying the groundwork for. So let's leave it there for a moment because I can't figure this one out yet. Not yet. I have a lot of problems with this press conference. It should have been cut shorter. I think anyone that goes before a press conference, in this case, Kathy, it doesn't necessarily mean that anyone should ever have to do a press conference. But she said so herself. It's the first time she ever did that. So I don't know if I would want to be up there knowing how upset I am, or if I know I've upset somebody. I'm not going to repeatedly go back and blame the people that, quote, caused it. So this is where personal responsibility comes in, okay? And I don't want to go into some line of moral justification, or I don't want to sound more upright than the other person. Just goes back to more of why you got to think before you speak. This is an example. Unfortunately, I recall a couple years ago when they were shutting these kids' lemonade stands down, and they were doing it in such a way that was harsh. And we've looked over the last couple years since the riots began, Occupy Wall Street. Well, it's a freedom of speech. You disrespect the very people that fought for those freedoms. And that's the conflict that a lot of people are running into, is that there are people who have died to keep those freedoms and maintain them. That's why there are privileges. Freedom, to have freedom of speech is a privilege. It's a God-given right, but it's also a privilege that is afforded by those in America, because you didn't get those rights without somebody keeping those rights for you. Somebody died to keep that right. And I often, you hear it over and over again, but there are people who have literally had to wear a uniform to defend other people's right to speak. That's why what we saw over the course of last 5 years is that you had free speech zones because of the danger of free speech. If you say something, it has consequences, like you can't say fire in a movie theater because it will cause a rampage. There are consequences. See, that's why Kathy, this has to go to court now, because they wanted to make this about having rights to free speech. You know what? My dad was a veteran. I served in uniform. I served that people can disagree. I have no problem disagreeing. The line is drawn somewhere when it becomes dangerous and slanderous and hurtful. There's a lot of nasty people on social media that respond negatively and disrespectfully. Unfortunately, in this culture where we live in a microwave society where everybody wants answers today, the problem is that you won't know the consequences down the road, okay? See, what we've seen since the Ferguson riots is that if you say something, whether you're right or wrong, or you act on your bad behavior, there's a consequence. It always follows with more people wanting to jump in. And that's kind of what social media is. It's more people jumping in. And I did not think this press conference helped her case at all. In fact, if I was a judge, I would say, Kathy, you know what? It's one thing to be apologized. It's another thing to keep this thing going. Okay? And I think what ends up happening is people get more angry. So I won't be surprised if people are more angry about this because of the way the attorney approached it. They should have cut her mic. I mean, a public statement would have been good enough. I think it still wouldn't have helped her case, I don't think. I don't think anything regarding how to address this would have helped her. I think the need to address the public, while I think some people find that's necessary, the problem is everything's out in the public nowadays. And the reason I think we've got to the point we are is because of the war in Iraq, because of the victims have been beheaded. What about that? See, the problem is that people don't take in consideration, in this case, Kathy's supporters, is that there were people that have really been victims of beheading. They really have been traumatized. And you live in a world where people pay attention and they're watching. And she, being the celebrity, she obviously already garners enough attention. Okay? She drew all this negative attention to herself, and she knew about it. The photographer and her knew about this, and they still did it. So while you have a privilege and you have a right maybe to speak freely, you also have to keep in mind, with those freedoms comes responsibility. And I saw how this was turned around, how President Trump, who's in a position of leadership, I don't think President Trump would ever say anything to anybody about not speaking freely. The problem is there's the consequences to violent language. Language, I think, is not helpful. Did not help her at all. I think this was a really bad idea. They should have cut her mic. That's just my personal opinion. Okay? They should have cut her mic. I think the way it is, this is how it really is. You really want to hear it? How it really is? Oftentimes what happens is there are people that are abused that never deserve this mistreatment, who have really, really been wounded and hurt, and they didn't jump into it. Now, the consequence of that is oftentimes people are very merciless, hurtful, and harmful. You know, because of the toxic political climate, she did more to hurt herself, and that's the honest. That's suicide, not only to your career but to your relationships. To a lot of people, they're gonna be a little bit more cautious, is what I'm saying. And this is just a working knowledge of how the public is. The public is not it's not very forgiving. It's not very understanding. Okay? That's on all things, on a lot of things. When it comes to this kind of stuff, this was unnecessary. There's ways to joke. This is so beyond what we call funny. You might get attention from your supporters, Kathy. I'm just going to speak to you, Kathy. You might get attention, but the thing is, what it causes is that's where the responsibility lies. That's why there's so many cases of slander and libel. And a lot of people lose their careers and lose their. It's not that they lose friendships. She might actually gain some supporters. For all the people that out there that dislike Donald Trump, I hope this is not just about Donald Trump and his family. I hope what this really says is that you can't just go say things like this. And whether you support President Trump or not, or whether you agree with Kathy or not, the bigger problem is if you can do this and you can hurt people this way. I mean, could you imagine all the bullying that really does go on in school? She's a 56-year-old woman. She has to think this through. I think we take a lot of caution in why we say things. I mean, I'm very cautious about how I say what I say, and I still get negative responses oftentimes. The attitudes on social media sometimes are unfair. Even when you're trying to be very careful, and when you can be that reckless with your words. Gosh, no wonder I'm not surprised that she is afraid of doing a news conference, assuming that your life is threatening. Yeah, you do not go there. Yeah, this is one of those areas. This is not the area to go in. I think for anyone, even for a comic, you might be considered a comedian, but this is bad. This is bad. This is like adding fuel to the fire. And if that was her intention, then I'm not surprised that people are threatening her life. I'm not surprised. That's the danger that people take. This world is not a safe place. You can't even, innocent people that do nothing wrong or just face that every day. Real victims that don't ask for anything. Let's talk about what those real victims go through. Real victims don't incite verbal backlashes on Twitter. Real victims don't, jump in head first saying things that they know is going to have real consequences. No, what happens with real victims is they innocently walk into something not knowing, just like in the case of Barron Trump, walking into to watch TV only to see that. That's the difference. Somebody that goes aggravating a situation, an already bad situation, doesn't to me fall in line with the victim. The problem is she's a victim of her own actions. That's the God's honest truth, and that's my point to the whole overall situation that occurred with this mask. I'm very, very bothered by this. There's a lot of things that make me upset and mad, but this is very, very bad. Very bad. Very bad because it's hurtful and it's downright wrong. I could talk. We'd gone on a couple days ago before this even came out about how kids are traumatized and how once you've been through this, the situation, the concern is that you may possibly be re-traumatized or relive it. And trauma victims will have to live with a scar sometimes with abuse or things that had happened to them. I mean, that's the consequence. For the victim, they have to live with these scars. And the thing is that you can't take those images off Facebook because things go viral. That thing is going to be duplicated over and over again. That's what they're going to remember of Kathy. And Kathy has to be aware of that. That there's a consequence, because those pictures will most likely be on social media. They'll be available publicly, probably as long as the internet exists. And that in itself is it's sad. It's sad. So long-term consequences, no one really knows. I mean, I can tell you that we watched many situations in the early into social media when people were threatening to kill themselves. They killed themselves because their reputation was ruined. They lost friends. The problem I have with unfriending, because I want to, since we're on the topic of bullying, the problem I have with unfriending is it's meant to hurt somebody. And I have to tell you, I don't unfriend anybody. I'll mention it to them that I'm taking you off my Facebook list because I don't want to cause more problems. That's one thing. I might not really be comfortable with having certain people on my Facebook, not because of out of being mean. But when people just deliberately unfriend and hurt people, that's a different story. I mean, I have removed friends and family from my Facebook page, only because we talk about topics that I don't think are very helpful. I can tell you over and over again, case after case, where there are people on social media that have friends and their friendships are ruined because they find out that they have opposing views. I wish the world was a little bit more sensitive to people with opposing views. But in this case, even if you and I, Kathy, if I was talking to you right now, Kathy, if you and I have opposing views, you know what I have a problem with the opposing views on one end, is that I just simply would not support this. It wouldn't matter if it was President Trump or if it was Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. It wouldn't matter. I would be totally uncomfortable with either way. What I find different about this is because it was done, and we know how Hollywood feels about President Trump. We know how a large portion of people in the public feel about President Trump. Does this legitimize? Does this bring legitimacy to that? Anger? What I think is really wrong is that if you want to live in a violent, world, this is only going to get worse. I'm going to tell you, having lived it firsthand, unless you've personally been a victim of violent crime, you would not want this. And that's after the fact. I'm telling you, it's always after the fact. That's why they say think it through. Think it through, because you don't know what happens afterwards. So let's just assume for a moment this was done all deliberately. Well, then I guess it drew the attention it needed to draw. And I don't know that that's wise either. So either or, here's some wisdom. If you're going to go and do something, you have to accept the consequences. And I don't know if a lot of people know what the consequences are out on the after effect. That's why they always say be cautious. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful you don't step over. Because a lot of people, unfortunately, you can rub somebody the wrong way. And most of the time, they're not very forgiving. And that's the world we live in. And I wish it wasn't always like that. But when it comes to the case regarding Kathy, I think they did a really, really bad, I think they did a poor job at discussing it. When you go into a courtroom, unfortunately, if you did that in front of a judge, they would probably listen. And I think they're more than fair to listen. I just don't know if it's going to help your case. And crying about it doesn't make it better. None of that. It's easier to say, I accept responsibility for what I did, and I'm sorry. That would have been fine. And I've heard some people that support Kathy say that, and I actually can agree with that. It would have been better if just accept responsibility and apology. I don't personally support Kathy for a lot of reasons, because I see that if you could go that far, I don't know if I would feel very comfortable with what could happen next. And I'm going to assume she might have learned from this, but what if she didn't? And looking at this press conference, I do not think she learned anything from it. It was more about blaming Trump and their family. You should expect them to be upset. Any attorney with any kind of larger view of the picture, the bigger picture here, you should have expected. I would be surprised that they wouldn't react. Have you ever been in a courtroom when a family finds out the verdict? How torn up families are? That might not rise to the occasion, but you should expect families or people to react when they're upset. And the problem is a lot of people don't even give that enough attention. That deserves a lot of attention. As for President Trump's family, I'm not surprised you're reacting. I'm not surprised that you're upset. I'm not surprised. And I would not feel comfortable. And this is going to take a little bit of time to sort out. I'm sorry that this ever went this far. Because I don't know that that's going to help her. And I don't think the public is very, very happy with this at all. And I think it made it worse, not better. That's just my view here at the Court of Public Opinion. If you'd like to respond, please respond below. The Court of Public Opinion at Planet Radio is a part of the Amateur Radio Network.